Okay, we're going to add one more method for you to solve quadratic equations to your repertoire, and that's going to be called completing the square. If we get this situation here where it says solve x squared minus x minus 1, typically your whole goal is to say, I want to take what's in A and what's in C, multiply those together. The number in B goes here. So are there two numbers that I can multiply to get -1 that also add to get -1? Well, the only two numbers that multiply to get -1 are those two numbers, which equals 0. So therefore we can't just factor this trinomial, because we can't split up that middle term of -1x. We can't split that up into two terms. So once we get to this point, there's two ways to do it: completing the square or the quadratic formula. Quadratic formula isn't this video, so you can check out that video, and that'll give you an idea on how to solve this using the quadratic formula. Okay, completing the square. So there's some steps here that you may want to write down if it helps you out. First step is to send -1, or send the number without a variable, to the other side. Basically what we're trying to do is we're trying to get the x squared term and the x term to be, we're trying to get those two terms to be on one side and the numbers without variables to be on the other side. Now this term right here, that term right there, we're going to fill in that space. So let's give this a variable c. Don't fill that in. Don't write that down. I'm just going to put that there for right now. Well, how do we find c? Well, c is equal to b divided by 2, and then you square that. Remember, general form of a quadratic is ax squared plus bx plus c. Typically it's equal to y or something, but in this case we have a number over there. So, and that's where we're getting b from. We're getting b as the number in front of x. So what number do we have in front of x? The number that we have in front of x is -1 half. Well, it's -1, and when we plug it in there for b, we get -1 half, and then we get squared. Okay, so here's the thing. This is what you should have on your paper. If we are going to add c to one side, we also have to add c to the other side. Well, in this case, what are we going to have cb plus that's c. Okay, now on the right side of the equal sign, I want to simplify that. On the left side of the equal sign, we are not going to simplify this part of it, and I'll explain to you why. But let's go ahead and simplify on the right side. So this should be -1 half times -1 half. Negative times negative is a positive. Multiply top numbers, multiply bottom numbers. Positive 1/4. Now, if we want to add 1 to it, we need common denominators. Common denominator should be 4/4. So add those together, we get 5/4. Okay, now by completing the square, the whole goal for this is I want to take and I want to put this left side in a parentheses that's going to be squared. Well, just watch here. Just watch what I'm doing. I'm going to put x, and then I'm going to put -1/2 here. Now you might ask why I'm doing that, but pay attention. What we're doing is we're going from here down to here. Well, if you're not familiar with how to do that, let's try to go from here to here. X minus 1/2 squared should be this right here. And now let's multiply these binomials. FOIL. X times x, x squared. X times negative 1/2 x. And negative 1/2 times x. And negative 1/2 times negative 1/2 should be a positive 1/4. Should be a positive 1/4. Combining like terms, which are the middle terms, negative 1/2 x minus 1/2 x should be negative 1x and plus 1/4. Now, do you see this right here? Should be this right here. X squared, x squared. Negative x, negative x. Positive 1/4. This doesn't look like positive 1/4, but remember, if we were to do negative 1/2 times negative 1/2, doesn't that equal positive 1/4? Okay. So, your whole goal is that you have to understand. Let me erase some of this scratch work that I've done. Your whole goal is that you have to understand how to factor this trinomial down into, oh, what happened here? Did you do that? Oh, there we go. Okay, you have to factor this trinomial down into this, those two binomials. Some things to remember, just some quick heads up. Remember, didn't we say that this term here was supposed to be like b divided by 2 and squared? Well, what is b divided by 2 in this situation? Isn't it negative 1/2? That right there is b divided by 2. So this goes there, b divided by 2 goes there, and simplified this. We're not finished, but we're really close to being finished. We have a few more examples to do of this. That way you can kind of see, once you get this part down, this beginning part down about where everything comes from, I think you'll be squared away and you'll be set to go. Okay, on the left side, if I want to get rid of squaring a number, I'm going to take the square root of it. So if I take the square root of the left side, that leaves me with x minus 1/2, and that's equal to the square root of 5/4. If I take the square root of both sides, I have to put a plus or minus sign with the right side there. Let's add 1/2 to both sides. Add 1/2 to both sides, so therefore we have 1/2 plus or minus, and we're going to say the square root of 5 over top of the square root of 4, and the square root of 4 happens to be, square root of 4 happens to be 2. So now that this is a 2, we notice they have common denominators. Let's go ahead and put that 2 on bottom. And on top, we're going to have 1 plus or minus square root of 5. 1 plus or minus square root of 5. All of that divided by 2. Since this is a quadratic, you should have 2 solutions. You don't always have 2 solutions, but you should always have 2 roots, whether they're real or imaginary. or sometimes you have one root, but if we look, that plus or minus right there will give us both of our solutions, both of our roots. Okay, let's move on to this next one, and let's see if you can, if you feel comfortable enough to do this on your own, go ahead. If not, follow along here. When we're solving a quadratic, our goal is to always start off and make everything set equal to 0. Okay, so we look at A and we look at C, multiply those. So we have to find two numbers that multiply to give us 13. Okay, those two numbers have to add up to give us -4. And I don't believe that they're going to add up to give us -4. Okay, so once we reach this point, we realize that we cannot factor this quadratic. So since we can't factor, we can either solve by completing the square, or we can use the quadratic formula. If we're solving using completing the square, first step, send this over. I didn't really tell you the steps in the last one. First step, you can get x squared and x on one side and get the number without a variable on the other side. Step number 2 would be to determine what c is, and then step number 3 would be to, I guess, factor, simplify and factor. So this is step number 1, x squared minus 4x. We got to figure out what this is, and we're going to have -13 here, and that extra part from the left side also gets added to the right side. How do we figure out what c is? Well, remember, c is half of b. In this case, b is -4, half of b squared. -4 divided by 2 should be -2, and then when we square it, we should get a +4. So we add 4 here, add 4 here. I'm not interested in adding 4 right there. I'm interested in adding -2 squared. And why am I interested in adding -2 squared? Is because on this left side, when you factor it down into two binomials, it's going to be x, and then this number right here in parentheses, x minus 2. How do I get x? Because x times x is going to be x squared, and -2 times -2 is that right there. All right, so we have factored that left side down into x minus 2, all of that squared. On the right side, -13 plus 4 should be -9. How are we supposed to get rid of squaring a number? Square root. We're square rooting both sides, so that leaves us x minus 2 is equal to plus or minus square root of -9. Oh, this is nice. Add 2 to both sides. So there's the 2 added, plus or minus. And now, what's the square root of -9? Well, the square root of 9 is 3, and what's... this is what the square root of -9 breaks down into. Square root of 9 is 3. What's the square root of -1? It's I. And so therefore, the two solutions there, these are not real solutions, these are imaginary solutions. It's 2 plus 3i, and the other one 2 minus 3i, and that's where you get both of your solutions, because one time you will add and then the next time you will subtract. Okay, we're going to come to this example, but look at these first two. What number do you see in front of x squared? 1. And in front of x squared here, 1 also. So let's come here. What number is in front of x squared? That is not 1. So we have to make it 1 if we're going to complete the square. But first off, let's see if we have to complete the square. You take A and C, multiply them together. Give me two numbers that multiply to give you 4. And then -2, -2, and -1, -4. Do any of those pairs of numbers add up to give you -6? 5, 4, -4, -5. None of them add up to give you -6. So therefore we cannot factor. We cannot factor this quadratic or solve this quadratic by factoring. So what we're going to have to do then is start off by dividing everything by 4, and that'll give us x squared minus reduce 6 over 4 to 3 over 2. And since this is 1/4, I want to go ahead and move it over to the right side. Now what number is going to go here and here also? What number are we going to add to both sides? Well, that has to be C. Well, C is equal to B over 2. Well, in this case, here's B, and if we divide it by 2, 2 over 1, how do you divide fractions? You divide fractions by multiplying by the reciprocal. Multiplying by the reciprocal, so go ahead and multiply those out. What are you going to get? I believe you're going to get 3/4. Don't forget we're supposed to square this. Okay, so if we had a negative divided by a positive, that's a negative 3/4. And let's go ahead and put this here, plus -3/4 squared. And what is -3/4 squared? Negative times a negative is a positive. You multiply the top numbers to get 9, multiply the bottom numbers to get 16. You're going to need common denominators. So you have to multiply that denominator by 4 to get 16, and multiply the number on top by 4. And -4 plus 9 should give you 5 over 16. So we're looking at 5 over 16 here. We want to split this up into, x times x will give you x squared, so we're going backwards here. And then this number, there you go. And let's go ahead and solve this out. Square root of both sides, so that leaves us x minus 3 over 4 is equal to plus or minus, and if we have the square root of 5 on top and we have the square root of 16 on bottom, what's the square root of 16? 4. We want to add 3/4 to both sides, so that has 3/4 plus or minus square root of 5 over 4. And let's finish out the problem. Since they both have common denominators of 4, we're going to have x is equal to 3 plus or minus the square root of 5 on top divided by 4 on bottom. Okie dokie. I have 3 examples here for you. This one here is after those 3 examples, I'd like you to try this one on your own. Remember, check to see if you can factor. If you can't factor, then finish by completing the square. You have to get the 1 in front of x squared in this one if you do complete the square. Pause the video and then hit play and check your solution with mine when you're finished. Let's see here. We're going to get -27, and it's supposed to add up to become 12. Two numbers that multiply to give you -27 add up to give you 12. You might be thinking 9 and -3, right? But that's 6. Or how about -9 and +3? Well, that's just -6. Um, 1 and negative 27 won't work. And that's it. So we cannot solve this by factoring. Cannot solve it by factoring. So let's go ahead and divide by 3 here to cancel and give us x squared. Divide this by 3 and divide this by 3. So that's plus 4x minus 3 is equal to 0. And then we're going to go x squared plus 4x is equal to, and let's add 3 to both sides. So that way now we can complete the square. Remember, c is going to be half of b. Half of b in this case is 4, and then squared. 4 divided by 2 is 2. Square it. What's 2 squared? 4. So we've added 4 to both sides. In this case, we're going to have x, and then we're going to have plus 2 squared is equal to, that's a 7. 3 plus 4 is 7. After we take the square root of both sides, x plus 2 is equal to plus or minus square root of 7. Subtract 2 from both sides. X is equal to negative 2 plus or minus square root of 7. And so there you have it. That's the solution there. And see if you have any questions. It's a process. You just follow the process. I'm sure you'll be fine. See me tomorrow. See me the next day. I don't know. See me next month. See me whenever. And I will answer your questions as much as I possibly can. Thank you.